got to organize and build support. We got to work together. Together! Now, they can't get their coal out of the ground without us because we're a union. Because we're the workers, damn it, and we take care of each other.
You are listening to a Rankandfile.ca podcast. Rankandfile.ca is a website dedicated to providing labor news and analysis for rebuilding trade unions and the workers' movement from below. We continue our Unifor interview series with Roxanne Dubois. Roxanne is a staff member originally with the CEP and now Unifor. She is also a former chairperson of the Canadian Federation of Students. To start off, I was wondering if you could talk about the process that was behind the community chapters and where the idea came from.
The process to start community chapters or to use community chapters as a way to reach out to non-traditional groups of workers came from the discussions in the creation of the new union. And as you mentioned, this process has been ongoing for a couple of years now. But in the discussions between CEP and CAW, there were a number of working groups that were created, one of which was on organizing. So you had key people in both organizations, elected and staff, as well as rank and file members, that basically had a certain amount of things to discuss and put forward a proposal for how the new union would be working, how the organizing policy would pan out. And so in that group, and this working group was one of I think 6 or 7 working groups. So there were many. But this specific group had to look at the challenge of organizing, the context in which the new union will be organizing, and how it was going to achieve the goals of trying to make organizing a priority, trying to acknowledge that the organizing work hasn't been done necessarily the way that it could have, and how to basically put forward an organizing program that would benefit the membership and as many people as possible, obviously. And so the proposal for the community chapters came from that working group, where it was acknowledged that there are more precarious workers now than there have ever been in Canada. Also, there are changes in how people work. There's more people who work part-time, more than one job, that kind of thing. There are a lot of students who are working at the same time to pay their tuition fees at the same time as as they're pursuing their education. And so the idea behind the community chapters was to really try and start up a model that was really dynamic and that was really a good way to reach out to those groups of people that have traditionally been left out by how traditional organizing works, or how even labor relations work at the moment in Canada.
I guess you kind of answered the question about goals, but is there anything more you wanted to elaborate on about the goals of the community chapters within Unifor itself?
There's many goals, actually, because it's not it's not a model that is made to respond to one single goal. It actually responds to many of the goals that Unifor has set out. One of which is obviously to involve groups of workers who have not traditionally been involved in the union, and to be able to represent them and to hobefully help them make gains in their workplace, in their situation wherever they are. So that's one goal. Another goal is obviously to increase the amount of people who are members of the union. And the community chapters model can assist people who eventually want to form a bargaining unit and go through a traditional organizing drive, but for whichever reason can't at the moment, or have done that and have failed. So there are some cases where workplaces have fallen short of what is the threshold to form a bargaining unit and to formally certify a bargaining unit. And so in those cases, the core group of activists who are still involved, who are still dedicated to forming a union, could form a community chapter and continue to engage with the union and to hopefully continue to do their outreach and to build from the place where they are. That's another goal. Sorry, go ahead.
No, keep going if there are more.
Yeah, well, the other ones, the other goals that are also part of the general Unifor goals, but at the same time are very applicable to the community chapters, is that it's, for one, there's a bit of I would say a bit of an argument to be made that unions go to bat for all workers, not just those who are members of the union. And that's interesting because through the community chapters model, there are people who may not have the kind of job that is usually unionized. If they want to work together with other people in a similar situation than them, and if they want to try and make gains, then they can work through Unifor to make that happen. And so it's the goal is to try and make that argument to show that the work is being done, and also to try and help people sort of redefine how we understand unions, what we do, how building the union is about building collective power in various groups of workers so that they can achieve improvements, gains, whatever they're trying to achieve.
And what sort of services and in terms of legal, financial grievances, and so on, would Unifor be able to provide to the community chapters?
It's important to remember that the program is being built from scratch, and so a lot of this stuff is in development, which is it's a challenge, but it's also very exciting because there's a lot of things, there's a lot of potential of what could go into the community chapters model. But from the get-go, one of the things we're trying to secure is a bit of a group insurance plan for health and dental benefits for people who are may not have access to health and dental benefits, could on a voluntary basis opt into a plan that might be cheaper than what they can usually get sort of off the shelf. So that would be trying to show that when we pool our resources and work together, we can develop some services and have access to some rates that we can't necessarily on our own. So that's a very basic service. And then down the line, the idea of connecting members and community chapters to some of the things that the union does already. For instance, education program, training programs, where people would be able to have access to the expertise of the union in terms of some of the things we always do. Either it's union representation, either it's campaign and advocacy, either it's organizing. All those things we currently give training and offer those things to our members. So extending that to members in community chapters will be a question of logistics and how we do it, but the goal and the principle is that sort of training will be something that's available. And ultimately, as I said, there's a lot of potential in terms of what we'd like to do and what we think we can offer, and it's about sort of trying to develop it in the next few months as the program grows.
Just to be clear for people who are listening to this, basically the community chapters at this point we're at a very early stage and it's very open-ended at this moment.
Well, yeah, it's a very new program, and I should mention that, in fact, just to be clear, a community chapter is very similar to what a local union would be, but it's for members who would form a group without necessarily having a collective agreement. And so the way that the legislation works in most places in the country is that it does not form necessarily a legal entity that will force the employer to bargain with you or to recognize you necessarily. But we know that a group of workers who try to speak in a collective voice will obviously have more power than individual workers trying to make gains on their own individual contracts. Mm-hmm. And so there are some. So I think that we have to recognize that the program is built on the fact that there's a principle of collective action that needs to be respected here. We have to have a group of people who want to work towards a common goal, and then you start having the basis for a community chapter.
And one last question about the process of putting together the community chapters. Were there any examples from around the world that inspired this idea?
In fact, it's something that various unions and various sort of portions of the labor movement have been experimenting in. The AFL-CIO is currently, this week, trying to study ways of opening their membership to millions of non-union or unorganized workers, which is interesting. But there are also unions such as I believe Unite, who have various levels of associate membership, and so it's not that the idea of trying to encourage groups to work through the union to try and achieve common goals is something that exists elsewhere. And obviously, what we're facing here in Canada is very similar to what other people are facing in other countries as a result of the global financial crisis. Increase in precarious work is not something that is only happening here; it's happening everywhere. And so it's I think it's a natural sort of way to try and see how we can strive to increase power for working people given the current context we're working in. And so there were the organizing working group, when looking at what is possible, there was definitely some study of what other unions are doing, what's happening in other countries. What's also interesting is that even within CEP, there was a very good example of a group of people who do not work in a single common workplace who had decided to work through the union and form, a specific bargaining unit, or rather a specific local, and that group is called the Canadian Freelance Union, which is basically becoming the first community chapter, and in many ways is the precursor to the community chapters model, because they represent self-employed workers in the media and communication sector. So freelance journalists, web designers, photographers, a lot of workers who work on their own as contract workers, and who decide to build this group so that they can develop services for each other, trying to break the isolation that exists between when you work freelance, when you work as a self-employed worker. And so they've been organizing through the CEP as a CEP local for the past few years. And in fact, a lot of the work that they did, we see as a way, something that basically is shaping the way that the community chapters model will evolve. They had a benefits program for their members. They had a way to try and connect them and offer some representation, some contract language to help freelancers out. So it's a very good, that was actually an internal example that was used.
In addition to the Freelancers Union, you gave some other examples at convention when you were speaking of where there was already interest, or, if I understood correctly, already work on developing community chapters. Can you speak to those?
In fact, even without, because the work on the community chapters model is still very new and has only happened for a month or so now. But even without doing a formal outreach to try and see where there might be interest, we already had groups of people who had heard that we were working on this idea of having a category of members in places where, or for workers who may not be in traditionally organized workplaces. And so even without doing outreach, we already had a group of groups essentially that were interested in starting to work to form community chapters. So maybe to give a bit of information on them. The first group is called Clergy United, and they represent members of the clergy of the United Church of Canada who have some very labor-related issues in their workplaces, and they try to work towards recognition with their employer that they can speak in a collective voice and that they can basically set ground rules for how their employment works. And they've been working with CAW for several years and are very excited to start the steps to create a community chapter. So they're already working to try and get everything in order to form a chapter. There's also a group of bike couriers in Toronto, in the GTA. So bike messengers who work in Toronto for various companies. And in fact, many of them have tried in the past few years to try and secure collective agreement, to try and certify their workplaces, and they sort of fall in a bit of a gray zone in terms of how the Ontario Employment Standards Act defines workers, and they're misqualified as contract workers when they have employers, but as a result have not been able to get collective agreements. And so they are trying to see if they could work through a community chapter to try and continue working towards getting a collective agreement in all of their workplaces, and at the same time continue doing outreach and bringing awareness to what the working conditions are for bike couriers. And in many cases, a lot of them are spend many days not even earning minimum wage. So when we talk about precarious workers, they are a good example. And the last group I'll mention is a group of workers who are associated with the Immigrant Workers Centre of Montreal. And so they're I guess, a bit of a workers' action centre that outreaches and mobilizes immigrant workers in Montreal. And they're trying to see how they could form a chapter. They already work with one of our member locals up there. And so they're going to try and see what projects are possible and how we could form a chapter there. So there's interest. It's just about trying to figure out how it will work and what the details are. So those are the projects that are ongoing now. And as I said, this is without doing any outreach. But I'm sure even just before convention, I've received a lot of interest. There is a lot of interest, so I'm sure hopefully we'll have more in the very soon.
Suppose I'm not a Unifor member who's covered by a collective agreement of the, either the old CAW or CEP and the new Unifor. What sort of things would I have to do to go about establishing a community chapter? What sort of things would I have to accomplish with myself and the others who wanted to build a community chapter?
To form a chapter, there are a few criteria. The first thing, obviously, is that we have to be talking about a group of people. The idea is that, although we do want as many people to be able to benefit from the membership of the union, what a union is workers working together to try and improve their situation, their conditions, and because of that, the goal is that we have to, if you want to start a chapter because you want to work on a campaign or because you want to try and address the fact that your employer doesn't recognize any of your basic rights or that kind of thing, then you have to make sure that you have a team of people around you that you'll be able to work on this together, and that you will be basically the first few people that start doing the work to form the chapter, but there has to be a group of people. That's really important. And then what you have to make sure that exists among that group of people is a bit of a point of commonality, is something that unites or that links everybody in that group, whether it's their workplace, their employment situation, their lack of employment, or any other factor. There has to be something that basically puts those workers in a bit of a similar situation in which they might want to build from. And then you have to have a critical mass, so they have to show that there is a sufficient number of people who are involved, who will potentially be involved as a result of your outreach, to show that there's a sustainable project here. And there's no number on that. I think it will be very dependent on each project. In some cases, it might be 5 people, depending. In some cases, it might be 50 or more. So it will depend on the project. And then the group of people will have to come up with an action plan. The idea for that is because people will, in the group, will basically commit to being members in community chapters for a year. But you have to show that you have a plan, you have an outreach strategy, you have some goals that you want to reach, and how you're going to do it. We should mention that members in community chapters will be paying dues, and so the specifics around that is that it's $5 a month for people who are not waged, so who don't earn an income, and a minimum of $10 a month for people who do earn an income. And the idea is that you'll pay that on a quarterly basis to the union, and 100% of those dues will go back directly to the community chapter's project, so that they have resources to implement the action plan.
Okay.
So that's how it's going to work in terms of getting resources. The idea is that if a group of workers wants to pool their resources and work as a team towards certain goals, and they want to do it through the union, then the community chapter model exists for that reason and exists to support them in their work.
So if I'm a Unifor member who is covered by a collective agreement, and I'd like to see my local help establish a community chapter or build those links, what could I do? What could my local do?
As a local union, there's a huge role to try and think of potential groups that might represent a natural extension of our membership. So if your local union is in a specific geographical area or in a specific sector, and you already have connections with a group of workers that either work in the same industry or work in the same region, but are not members of the union for whichever reason, then is there a possibility here of extending membership through creating a community chapter and trying to formalize the relationship with this group of workers and trying to give them a platform from which they can organize and they can continue working towards making gains, whether that's recognition, whether that's wages, whether that's rights, whatever their common goal is. Can the local union assist them by hosting them as a community chapter? And so the steps would be very similar. You'd have to basically do some outreach, try and get a group of people who are interested in doing it, and then they will have to draft an action plan. They will have to outreach to members to show how many people are involved. And then each new community chapter project is reviewed by the National Executive Board of the union to make sure it's sort of in line and corresponds with all the criteria. And once it gets approval, then it's good to go. The community chapter adopts internal bylaws and conducts a bit of an election to have some representatives, and then the local union will be in a position to involve them in everything that they're doing, whether it's events, whether it's advocacy and campaigns. To try and involve the members in community chapters will be the role of the local union.
You were national chairperson of the CFS, and I was wondering if you'd given any thought or had an insight on how maybe students in universities and colleges and maybe even high schools, how they could relate to this community chapter idea.
I think that for many people who have gone through school, we're always facing the challenge that it's very rare where you have people who can just be a student. Most students are also workers, work to be able to pay for tuition fees, but also to pay for those expenses that are related to being away from your parents and having to provide for yourself. And so I think it's clear that there is a lot of possibilities here. For instance, I think that it would be really great to set up some groups of students who work in retail or students who work in various in the restaurant industry, for instance. So I think that there might be an interesting way here to try and reach out to groups of students who work in a specific industry and try to do some outreach from there. Try and engage those people in a community chapter so that they can work on various issues around their wages, their recognition. Retail and the restaurant industry are some of the growing most the fastest growing industries in the country, and at the same time they're the lowest in terms of unionized density or rates, which means there's a lot of opportunity there to try and get people involved, to try and make sure that people get respect and dignity in their workplaces, whether they are students or whether they are out of school. That doesn't matter. But I think that in terms of reaching out to groups of students who work in a specific industry might be really interesting.
Is there anything else about community chapters that you wanted to say that I didn't address in any of my questions?
I think there's a lot of exciting excitement around the community chapters process. It's something that it's being designed so that new members will be able to work with current members to try and build our strength in more places, and I think that's it's really exciting. And I think that if anyone is interested, obviously let's get in touch and try to talk about some of the possibilities that there might be. The goal here with this project is to give workers a way to build their power wherever they are. If that's in an unorganized workplace, if it's the fact that they're unemployed and want to work with other unemployed people to try and bring awareness to some of the EI changes that have happened recently, all those kinds of things. There's a lot of possibilities, and I think that's where we're going.
Great, thanks a lot.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to a Rankandfile.ca podcast. Check us out on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube.